11 o'clock on the dot, and sometimes we have him on. We were doing Fridays for a bit, but when breaking news happens, we wanted to get him on as soon as possible. So we are joined by my guy, the one and only Brett Siegel, national NBA insider and reporter for Clutch Points. Brett, good to hear from you again. It's over, Brett. It's over.
It's finally over. We finally have a decision made by Jonathan Kuminga and the Warriors, which then opened the floodgates for them to finish off their offseason of what we've been reporting. Well, it seems like ever since before Summer League. So finally, the last team that was on the board to make a move in free agency has done so as training camp and media day begin. And now the Warriors' quest to win another championship with Stephen Curry and get that fifth ring begins today.
Let's start here, Brett, because a lot of Warriors fans, and I know they were, some people were coming at you and your mention. Some people were coming at me from the Kings angle, saying that I sound salty. So let's start here. From your point of view, who, quote unquote, won this standoff?
It's the Warriors. And the reason is if Jonathan Kuminga had accepted that qualifying offer like him and his agent had been threatening over the last few weeks leading up to this deadline, which is going to be tonight, for him to accept that qualifying offer. If he had done so, the Warriors would have been trapped, where it would have been such a toxic environment knowing that he doesn't want to be there. He was going to be leaving next offseason. If he signed that qualifying offer, he couldn't be traded because it was $7.8 million, and he would have a no-trade clause. So he would have full control of his contract and immediate future with the Warriors. Who knows what kind of role he would have had if they would have played him less because of that. But now they don't have to worry about that at all. They get him on that $22.5 million cap hit this year, which will increase if he is traded because he does have a 15% trade kicker. But it's important to have that $20 million slide. And you and me have talked about, Allen, how when the Warriors traded Andrew Wiggins, they lost kind of an ability to make a trade moving forward where they had Jimmy Butler, they had Stephen Curry and Draymond Green, but you don't have that middle-tier contract anymore to then go out and make changes to your roster as you see fit at the trade deadline. Now that you have Jonathan Kuminga at $22.5 million, that's basically a $22.5 million trade exception that you can now go out, see what's on the market. Maybe it is Malik Monk that you want to add midseason depending on injuries. Maybe it's somebody else. Maybe Giannis Antetokounmpo becomes available. Now all of a sudden you have $22 million that you can immediately contribute to getting a big salary player like that. So it keeps all the Warriors' options open. It allows them to continue playing at the table and figuring out what they want their roster to look like. But in the short term, you get Jonathan Kuminga back. He's happy. He's getting paid. And maybe this is a relationship that can move forward, even though it seemed like it's been fractured all offseason. It seems like he doesn't want to be there long term. But, hey, anything can happen in this league, and we've seen crazier things before.
Talking to Brett Siegel, national NBA insider and reporter for Clutch Points. Brett, when it comes to the idea of, and Shams put it, I want to get it exactly correct. This made me chuckle a little bit, Brett. The deal has a team option designed for the contract to be ripped up and renegotiated next summer. That's some, I guess, agent spin, or that's how it sounded to me, Brett. What does that actually mean, right? Because he could get traded to the Pelicans or whoever, and they don't owe him anything. They can pick it up if they want, or they can not pick it up if you want. What did you take from Shams adding that little wrinkle into it? The deal as a team option designed for the contract to be ripped up and renegotiated next summer.
Yeah, it's pretty clear where that's coming from. It's not coming from the team.
Yeah.
And if the Warriors wanted to, they pick up that option and trap Jonathan Kuminga next year if he plays well and they don't want to get rid of him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really language that's coming from, hey, we did you a solid, so you kind of have to own up to that and do us one if you don't get what you want. Mm-hmm. Because the idea of signing this $22.5 million contract is Jonathan Kuminga to play for the Warriors, be a focal point for them behind those veteran all-stars, but also be that trade exception like we mentioned. And that's kind of the expectation right now, is that they're looking at this contract, Kuminga and his camp are looking at it as if he's going to be on the move before February's trade deadline. And now where that ends up, who knows? But if he's not traded and he's on the Warriors roster at the end of the season, they expect them to kind of honor this unwritten, unspoken agreement where the contract will be ripped up and he will become a free agent again, and whether or not they negotiate another long-term deal or he signs somewhere else. It's basically just Kaminga and his camp saying that they have control of their future. They're going to make the decisions there, and that's that. But in reality, it's really the Warriors that kind of hold the ball now, and they can really dictate what's going to happen with Jonathan Kuminga, where he could potentially be traded, and what they could potentially get back in a trade.
Talking to Brett Siegel, national NBA insider and reporter for Clutch Points. So just to confirm, Brett, and I saw that floating around as well, there is no clear no trade clause for Kaminga. The Warriors could send him to the Guangdong Tigers. They can do whatever they want with Kaminga, and he's got no say as far as the trade is concerned. But I guess they're saying, I guess there's going to be an attempt to work with him, but they don't really have to. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. I don't necessarily know about a trade to China. I don't think the CBA would allow that. But in theory, yes, they can basically trade him to any team that they want. The implicit no trade clause that he was to receive from this 2-year deal was waived in the agreement with him getting that trade kicker and with him getting an elevated salary. So that's kind of where it's at. It's in quotes, it's really a 2-year, $46.8 million deal. And with that 15% trade kicker, that's what gets you to that 48.5%. And we're just kind of labeling it as a 48.5% deal because we're expecting that trade to happen. Obviously, it's only a cap hit of $22.5 million, though, and that's really the big deal here for the Warriors, because there was some discrepancy when this deal was first reported as $14.5 million, and the trade kicker came later on. The news of that, it's like, well, is it $22.5 million? Is it $23.7 million? $23.8 million? And why is that important? Well, it's because of these other guys that signed. You had Al Horford that signed for a 2-year, $12 million deal at the taxpayer mid-level. It's 5.7 this year, 6.3 next year. But that's important because they're hard capped at the second apron now. They cannot cross that line. And that Jonathan Kuminga mark, that small difference in that $1 million because of that 15% trade kicker, you now can't sign Seth Curry outright. They had to sign him to a training camp deal. They're going to waive him before the regular season starts and then re-sign him again on November 15th. It's just a little of cap maneuverability that we've seen from teams in the past. One that comes to mind is the New York Knicks with the way that they balanced their sheets last year of signing guys, releasing them, bringing them back. We're going to see a similar thing here with the Warriors. But that's really why this contract is unique, because as we report it as $48.5 million, it's really just a base compensation of 46.8 that can reach 48.5.
Talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Brett, teams wake up this morning or at about 3:30 when it broke yesterday. They see that Jonathan Kuminga, he's on this contract now at about $24 million a year, and the Warriors are going to look to move him in January. What do you think his value is, and how many teams do you think kind of perked up when they saw that to think, okay, we might be interested?
For Jonathan Kuminga?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I think the Kings, their interest isn't going to go away. And even if they agree to a long-term extension with Keegan Murray, I think that the goal is to still pursue Jonathan Kuminga. And they wouldn't have pursued Jonathan Kuminga this offseason with the idea that they're going to get rid of Keegan Murray, or else they would have just offered him in those sign and trade talks. So obviously they have some kind of idea of what they want moving forward. I would pretty much assume that they're going to be in contact with the Warriors leading up to the trade deadline, depending on how both their seasons are going. I think that a team like the Chicago Bulls, who we've rumored in the past of having interest in Jonathan Kuminga, they're going to be a team that potentially looks to make moves at the trade deadline with all their expiring contracts. They got Nikola Vucevic, who's expiring. Zach Collins is on an expiring deal. Kevin Huerter, Kobe White. Those are all question marks there of what their futures are going to look like. And maybe there's a trade that they can make with the Warriors. Maybe there's a multi-team trade to be had there where Kaminga ends up in Chicago and some of those pieces go elsewhere. But it's really going to be up to how this season goes. What teams are going to deal with injuries? How are the Warriors going to be playing come time when Kaminga becomes trade eligible on January 15th? Are they going to be a team that is kind of in the top 4 of the standings, or are they going to be a borderline playing team? Those are important aspects of look to trade Jonathan Kuminga, because if he's having a great season and they're being successful, I don't necessarily think that they're going to just kind of jump the gun and just trade him with no idea of what they're getting back. So that's the important factor. And then obviously is the other side of things with other teams, who's injured, where their standing is. Are they achieving expectations, or are they underachieving expectations? So that's all going to play a role in how this Kaminga stuff plays out. But think of this contract for Kaminga as extending his trade window, basically, where the sign-in trades weren't there, the value wasn't good, the Warriors didn't want to do it, and they were dealing with base year compensation rules and the problems thereof. If they had accepted the Kings trade with Malik Monk, they would have then had to dump Buddy Hield or Moses Moody, something that they weren't willing to do. So this kind of gives them another 4.5 months to figure out what they want to do with Jonathan Kuminga, and it opens up a lot more optionality on the trade market with teams that face uncertain futures and have non-guaranteed or one-year contracts on their books that they'll be looking to move.
Talking to Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. Brett, earlier you said that, look, you never know what could happen in the NBA. Maybe it ends up working out for them. Kaminga and his agent, his camp, they've said, hey, if we sign, we're going to be all in. I know that the Warriors feel like their culture is strong enough that they can kind of get him back on the right side of things, just getting him in the building. What are the chances that this does work out? And Kaminga is, I know people have said, hey, you look at these guys are all 37, 38 years old. They're going to need some days off, and Kaminga can really slide in there and be that alpha dog when Jimmy or whoever needs to miss some time. What are the chances that this does work out and Kaminga ends up becoming the future for the Golden State Warriors?
It's really hard to put like a number percentage on that right now, because it really does depend on what his role is going to look like. Is Steve Kerr going to put him in a bigger role and look to get some of his veterans more rest early on in the regular season? Will Kaminga step up and be better than he was and look like that player that he was in that Timberwolves series? So there's still a lot of question marks that need to be answered here in order to truly say, well, this could get figured out. But the biggest thing for me, and from digging through all this reporting and talking with the teams and getting information on this Kaminga saga throughout the offseason, the biggest thing I learned is that the Warriors veterans are in his corner. Right. Stephen Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green were advocates for the Warriors to get this done with Jonathan Kuminga as it dragged out into August and then early September. They wanted to see a resolution, and they wanted him back. And surprisingly enough, it was a surprise to me, and it may come to a surprise to others. Draymond Green has been a huge advocate for Jonathan Kuminga. He's wanted him back, and he's kind of been a mentor to him in a way. And Jimmy Butler, since he's come over, he's kind of been the same. So it's interesting to hear that. And then you see this stalemate going up to the very last minutes, very last hours of this deadline for the qualifying offer. Ultimately, they reach a deal, and they avoid that disastrous scenario for both parties. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Is there still a feeling of Jonathan Kuminga wanting change? Is he going to be open to any role that Steve Kerr gives him? Are the veterans going to talk to him and have him very, very much buy into this idea of, hey, you're the essential fourth piece in our championship run? But that back in 2022, you had Steph, you had Draymond, you had Clay. Who was that fourth guy? It was Jordan Poole, and he was essential to the Warriors' run. Maybe they talk to him in that capacity and say, you're going to be this year's Jordan Poole. We need you to be that in order for us to win a championship. And who knows, if he succeeds in that role and they don't trade him and they're playing very well come January, come February, if everything's going well and he's happy, I would say that there's a good chance that they could maybe reach another long-term extension here.
Talking to Brett Siegel, who covers the NBA, National NBA Insider for Clutch Points. Just a couple more for you, Brett. What do you think, as far as the trade conversation, and we know that Kaminga kind of wanted to get out of town, as far as the Warriors, what do you think they're looking for? Because the funny thing is, as this whole thing kept evolving, if you look around at what the Warriors need, I know they wish that he was a bit better at shooting the three-point ball, and that's everybody these days. But the funniest part is that what the Warriors have been asking for in these trades is essentially what Jonathan Kuminga is. It's just the mental aspect and the buy-in. And I've heard the word Trey Murphy. I don't know why, if you're the Pelicans. Now, I don't know why the Pelicans do a lot of things, but I don't know why, if you're the Pelicans, you move off of Trey Murphy unless the Warriors are going to give you Kaminga and some picks and more than that. What are the Warriors looking for if he gets into the building and they say, hey, yeah, it's more of the same, it's not working with Steve Kerr? Do the Warriors even know what they're looking for?
If they're going to trade Jonathan Kuminga, I can promise you it's not going to be for a bunch of guards. I don't believe it's going to be for a center. They're going to be looking for a guy in that same position simply because they don't have that type of position anymore. They got rid of Andrew Wiggins, and that was their 3-and-D wing. That was a guy that was a foundational piece And yes, they replaced him with Jimmy Butler, who's a terrific player. But Butler's different from Wiggins in the sense that he's not going to take on those big-time defensive responsibilities late in his career as well as Wiggins could have. He's not the three-point shooter that Wiggins was during his All-Star season. So that's what they wanted Jonathan Kuminga to be when they drafted him. They envisioned him being another Andrew Wiggins, but better, more athletic, more able to be a facilitator and ball handler, able to hold down the second unit when Steph or Draymond's not in the game and really be one of those guys. Has he shown flashes of that? Of course he has. Can he do it and sustain it over an 82-game season next to these stars? That's still the question that's unanswered, and that's why there's some uncertainty from the organization standpoint surrounding Jonathan Kuminga and why they are so hesitant during these negotiations to just say, you know what, we're going to give him what he wants. It was more of, no, he still needs time to develop. We don't know what he can be in this system, so it has to be something that goes both ways and gives us the option to move him if there's a trade that comes to light that makes sense for us. And what would that trade look like? It would have to be another forward in my mind. It has to be some kind of 3-and-D player that can be a complementary piece and a secondary piece next to Curry, Butler, and Green, because over the next 2 years, this season and then next year, the 26-27 season, that's the window for the Warriors right now. These guys are under contract for 2 years. After that, we don't know what this roster is going to look like. Maybe they'll bring everybody back for another year or two. Maybe they'll go in a different direction with Steph and Draymond, but it's really kind of one of those wait-and-see type things. So right now is their chance to win. They know that they have a roster that can compete, and we saw that during the second half of the year last season. We saw it in the playoffs. If Steph didn't get hurt with his hamstring injury, who knows how that Timberwolves series would have played out. So a lot of things that are still going the Warriors' way, and they still believe that they are a championship organization. So if they are to trade Jonathan Kuminga, it's going to be for a player or two that can come in, really help them achieve that championship goal. A guy like Trey Murphy or Herb Jones, obviously two guys that can play well on the wing, 3-and-D like players, that would be essential pieces in a Warriors system and fit in perfectly. So I think that's obviously the type of guys that you're looking at. But it really depends on who becomes available. And I'm looking at the Eastern Conference specifically. There's so many question marks of what these teams will look like come time for the trade deadline with how wide open it is. And I think that's going to play a major role in discussions with Kaminga.
Talking to Brett Siegel, NBA insider for Clutch Points. So, Brett, I was talking before you joined us, and I know I asked you this question before about if the Kings don't get Jonathan Kuminga now, it's going to be really hard for them. And you actually were a bit more optimistic as far as the Kings having an opportunity. But, Brett, I'm just looking around at this $24 million price point. It's tough for me to see, based on what the Kings have, unless a third team gets involved, how, because we know, DeMar DeRozan making $24 million doesn't seem like right now, to your point, never know with injuries, that the Warriors were interested in a DeMar DeRozan. They weren't terribly interested in Malik Monk. We know they were interested in Keegan and Keon, but it's hard for me to see the Kings being in a good spot to make a trade for Kaminga in January, just based on that price point and other teams. That's why I asked you about his value and other teams being interested in Kaminga. Am I way off on that? Did the Kings' opportunity to acquire Kaminga, unless that's in free agency once this is all said and done, if they rip up the contract like Shams talked about, did the Kings kind of drop in their opportunity to add Jonathan Kuminga through trade, or am I way off on that?
It really depends on the timing, and interesting to bring up and talk about, especially from the Kings' point of view, because if the Kings are not in playoff contention come trade deadline time, I think it's pretty clear that they're going to become sellers. You're going to see Malik Monk possibly on the move. You're going to see DeMar DeRozan possibly on the move. And if they become sellers, they have that capability to then go out and get Jonathan Kuminga and experiment for the rest of the year and see how things work out. Now, if you look at it through the lens of a different team, maybe not the Kings, but some other team, let's say in the East, who is contending, and let's say they're in a similar cap situation as the Kings, where they're hard capped at the first apron, they can't really move many contracts, would a contending team go out on a limb and move an essential piece to get Jonathan Kuminga? And I think the answer there is no. So really what we're looking at are teams that aren't living up to expectations, teams that are going to be selling before the trade deadline and take a chance on Jonathan Kuminga because he has that team option for next season. They wouldn't have a long-term commitment to him. They can basically bring him in for a trial, see how things go, make a decision on that team option, and then potentially have him for one more year during their rebuild or during their resurgence, in a way, as some teams describe it. But when we look at this strictly from a Kings perspective, I do agree with you. I think that it would be tough mid-season for them to acquire him at the trade deadline, because you can't just move Malik Monk at that point. You'd probably have to move a guy like Devin Carter or Dario Saric too, given their cap situation and the fact that they're hard capped at that first apron. But come time for the offseason, things change, because DeMar DeRozan, his deal's not fully guaranteed there. You could potentially move him or dump him. You have Malik Monk, who would be, I don't want to say easier to trade, but much easier to trade a guy that has 2 years left on his contract than 3. Right. Then you have Dennis Schroeder. Would he potentially be on the move after 1 year? So you have the ability to move money around a lot easier if you're the Kings in the offseason. And that's why I say that the ability to go out and pursue Kaminga next year, if he's in free agency or if the team option gets picked up by the Warriors, I think that it's still much easier for them to go out and get him next offseason compared to this offseason, where their finances were kind of tied up from that first apron hard cap. They didn't have as good of assets to offer. Next season, they got expiring contracts. They could potentially get another team involved early on near the draft. So that's why I say I wouldn't count out the Kings just yet. They're going to be looking at this situation closely. There's still a love for Jonathan Kuminga within their organization, and I think that that's a player that they do have long-term plans for if they can potentially get their hands on him.
Yeah, Brett, it sounds like to me what you're saying is the Kings have to survive through the Warriors' pipe dreams. If the Kings survive through the Warriors not being able to get a Trey Murphy or Giannis or Jokic, and then you're looking at, hey, now we're the Warriors. We're in a similar position where his contract is expiring. We might lose him for nothing. We can open it up. Because my fear is right now, the Warriors with this control, they're not moving Jonathan Kuminga for anybody on the Kings. That's my feeling on it. But if you make it through this season and they don't make a deal, because, you know, Warriors fans all saying they're going to get Trey Murphy and all these guys. If you make it through this season and he's still on the Warriors, now the Warriors start saying, okay, well, there's not as many suitors as we thought. Let's open this thing back up again. And maybe it's a Keon and whatever the case is. That's how I'm understanding how you're kind of breaking it down.
Right. Like the ball's in the Warriors' court here, where they have this Jonathan Kuminga, in quotes, trade exception, and they have 4 months to decide. Is he going to be a part of their roster? Are they in a championship position? Or is it going to be much of the same of what we talked about this offseason, where things aren't working out? It's the same old story, and he wants to be on the move, and so they're going to possibly look to trade him when he becomes trade eligible January 15th. From that point, they have about 3.5, 4 weeks to figure out a deal before the trade deadline. And so that's really what this front office is going to be evaluating from now till the trade deadline, is what players become available, what teams could Jonathan Kuminga possibly be on the move to. That would make sense for the Warriors to pursue a player that they have on their roster. And the second thing, or the third thing, is really out of the Warriors' control. It's just who's going to be available. Is a guy like Trey Murphy even available? Right. And everything that I've heard this offseason in terms of the Pelicans is that they have no desire to move him. So if that holds, and that's the case come February, no matter what the Warriors offer, they're not going to be giving up Trey Murphy. So you can cross that off, and then you could just go down the list of other teams. And of course, I'm hypothetically speaking here. I'm not saying that Trey Murphy is never going to be on the move. It's just right now the Pelicans have signaled that they don't have desire to trade him. So if that holds, then the Warriors are kind of out of luck on that front, and they would have to go to plan B and go to plan C and plan D and whatever of what they have planned with Kaminga. And you can even look at this from another team that pursued Kaminga this offseason sign trade talks. It wasn't just the Kings. You also had the Phoenix Suns, were another team, and they're kind of in the same waiting game as the Kings, where they don't have anything different to offer the Warriors before the trade deadline. It's still just Grayson Allen. It's still Royce O'Neal. It's still these contracts that the Warriors didn't want, just like with the Kings with Malik Monk. So if one of those teams are to re-engage in trade conversations to try to pursue Jonathan Kuminga, you're now talking about getting another team involved. And that's why it was essential for the Warriors to get Kuminga on this contract, because the sign and trade talks that happened this offseason were just one-and-ones. It was one team and the Warriors. So now at the trade deadline, you have the optionality to get other teams involved that are in different cap situations, that are in different situations come time for the standings. They may go from a team that was buying this offseason to all of a sudden a team that sells before the trade deadline. So that's why it was important to get this contract done. You can now get other teams involved in. And if Kaminga is to be on the move right now, It's very early. It's October 1st, but if he is to be on the move, I feel fairly confident saying that would be a multi-team trade for sure.
Brett Siegel bringing the heat as always. Brett, thank you so much for joining us, national NBA insider and reporter for Clutch Points. Brett, you know we're going to do it again, and I can't wait to talk to you when that happens. Appreciate you, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Anytime, Allen. I appreciate it. Thanks.
On the other side, we will break down everything Brett had to say. Also, is Dennis Schroeder going to make more of an impact than any of us realize? Don't move. More Allen Stiles coming up next.
Staples